So we're live on YouTube. Welcome everybody there on YouTube and welcome everybody here in the Zoom room with me. Welcome to the Friday webinar. Just going to get started in a moment. We're just at the top of the hour now, and I want to make sure everyone has a chance to come in that has registered and wants to be here today. If anybody has any questions, feel free to throw your questions in the chat box. I'm by myself today. Andrew Harbridge usually joins me for these webinars, or has been for the last 3 weeks, but he's not able to join us today. And so I'm just flying solo here, and we're going to work through Mosaics grade 2 now. We spent the last 2 weeks looking at grade 1 very closely, and I played through all of the music. And I plan to do the same here, starting with grade 2 today. Here's what our book looks like. I know a lot of you have ordered this already. We're on our second print run of that, and it's quickly selling out. On the back cover, we have advertisements for digital badges. If anyone's curious about that, you can check out our webinars on the replays on the CCTV YouTube channel. And welcome to everyone watching on the YouTube channel with me live today. I see a few there, as well as those of you who are watching the replay. Thanks for joining and taking time to check in and see what Mosaics 2 has in store for us. All the music there. I should have a copy of Mosaics 3 in hand in the next few days. And so in a couple weeks' time, we'll get on to book 3 as well. So you can get a sneak peek at what's in there, should you be curious to know for your students. These books are pretty close. I bet you there are some retail stores now that are stocking them. I know the Long and McQuaid chain has long had them now, and I'm sure they're on the shelves. So you can feel free to ask your retailers for those. And if anyone has a retailer that's not on the Long and McQuaid chain that wants to order them, feel free to reach out, tell them to reach straight out to Wanless Music or andrewharbridge.com, and they'll be able to set them up with an account. That's where they'll get the best deal on ordering them instead of going through a distributor. And then you can get those books, hopefully. Of course, you can order them anytime, either on wanlessmusic.com or andrewharbridge.com, the Harbridge Publishing House website. You can order them there and they ship them out. They are controlled by the same entity now. So my plan today is, as I've been doing the last couple of weeks, is to play through the music. We're going to go through group 1 today. Group 1 encompasses baroque and classical style music. I'm going to kind of mix and match them. I'll play through the book in order, and I'll stop at various pieces like I have been, just to highlight a few little things that we listen for, just as pedagogical reminders about what we like to listen for in exam situations or in performance situations. Hopefully that stimulates some kind of discussion as it did last week. And those of you here with me live on Zoom, feel free to throw any comments or questions in the chat box, and I'm happy to stop and answer those at any time when I see them pop up there. So I'm going to share my screen here. We'll take a look. We'll dive right into this. Taking a look at what the inside of the book looks like. So here's the cover page here. The title page inside, not the cover necessarily, but inside the title page. Credits, we have our forward. We've talked about that over a couple of weeks. You can look at the very first webinar we did on September 6th, where I read through the forward in detail. And those of you that have been on these webinars or watched the replay lately, you know that I like to talk about the editing and how, especially in group 1 music, like we're going to cover today, you can go through and re-edit however you see fit. You're not held to the articulation markings, and certainly not the fingering markings or even the dynamic markings that are on the page. And I'll talk about that as I go, so that you understand what kind of license you really have in terms of working through these pieces with your students. Here's a look at table of contents. Again, we're going through group 1. We'll see at the bottom of group 1, Soldier's March by Robert Schumann. That's in fact in group 2. That's a romantic style piece from the Romantic era. So our journey today will end with the Sonatina in C by Tobias Hasslinger. Any copies you order won't have that in there. Robert Schumann will be in group 2. I'm just using an old PDF here. The group 2 pieces for grade 2, I think we're going to take a look at next week, next Friday. And so I'll send each of you a link to your inbox so that you can join me next Friday, where we'll finish off grade 2. The week after that, heading into the Thanksgiving week, and we'll probably take that Friday off, because I know by that point we've gone for 5 weeks straight. And my plan this year is to offer a webinar about 3 out of every 4 Fridays. And I've got a couple other people lined up already later in October that I'll tell you about at some point in the future, so we can get excited about other presentations as well. So we're starting here with Vivace. This is a little piece by Anton Diabelli. It's in a classical style. We have lots of very simple classical style pieces here in grade 2 still, very approachable for grade 2. And you'll see some slightly on the easier side like this, and some slightly on the harder side, and of course everything in between. So you can tailor that progression with your students depending what you think they can handle. So again, I'm pretty happy with the audio lately as I hear the recordings on YouTube, so I'll be constantly adjusting that. I have to remember to turn on original sound, of course, so that you can hear my piano. And that will stay on for the duration because it seems to be still picking up my voice quite well. I turn my volume down here for when I'm playing on the piano. And we're going to start with this vivace by Diabelli. So that went mostly legato all the way through. A little bit of subtle pedal in the background. You don't have to bother with that with your students. That's just me being really picky about the resonance and trying to get the sound through as smoothly as I can through the microphone today. But if you're really advanced with your students, that's something you could do. I don't bathe in the pedal where I'm holding the pedal down and changing it at every bar. It's not right to the floor. It's just little tiny bits. Especially right now because I have a squeaky pedal. You'll hear that from time to time. I have a good mic here picking that up. And I have the technician coming tomorrow to fix that for me. For those that aren't sure, the squeaky pedal is an interesting thing. I've dealt with a lot lately since April here on my U3. It's a Yamaha U3. It's probably about 30 years old. And the first fix to squeaky pedal was a rod at the back that controls the dampers. And that rod, after a while, there are little bushings inside that connect the whole mechanism together that dry out a little bit. So the whole thing got lubricated up and the pedal had much less friction in it. And it stopped squeaking. But then a couple of weeks ago, it started squeaking again more at the foot. And so that one's a much easier fix. The first fix was a 2-hour fix to get that done. And so just so you know, there's a squeaky pedal. I've learned a lot in the last few months about what's involved and what a technician can do to alleviate that. And certainly I wouldn't recommend, and I wouldn't try and fix these things on my own because it takes a special lubricant and a lot of know-how in terms of how these mechanisms are put together. Okay, so that's vivace. That's a little aside. I think the other thing in this one, we look at 3/8 time. We don't see 3/8 time a lot in things like this. That indicates to me right away that it's going to be a little bit quicker. It's going to be a quicker pace that moves us along. I didn't play it overly fast. It could certainly go a little faster. It could go a little slower as well. But if we get too slow with this, it starts to sound like 3/4. Maybe something like this. Doesn't quite capture the vivace character the same way. And so that's something we want to watch for here in terms of tempo. Let's go on to the next piece here. Echo Says. Echo Says is a Scottish dance. This one's quite lively and exciting. It's by Hessler. It's a nice pre-classic piece here. Lots of little articulation with these 3-note slurs. And so every time I get one of these little 3-note slurs, I'm trying to go to the downbeat and create an audible gesture. Yada-dum, yada-dum, yada-dum. So I have to make sure the first notes or the 2/8 notes are pickups and they're lighter. And it goes to and tapers with a slight crescendo to the downbeat each time. Also noticing this one's in 2/2 time. Again, marked vivace. Both of those things indicate something that's a little bit quicker. So I'm going to try and make this feel like 2 beats per bar. Listen for that little leaning forward in those 3-note slurs in the right hand. I'm going to try and accent that so that there is some kind of audible gesture. So I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. It's just very often we'll hear students taking a 3-note slur like they're thinking they have to drop on the first one and lighten up at the end of the slur. Not all slurs do we lighten up on. Some slurs tumble forward. So if we hear this, for example, I'll play it the opposite way with the articulation. As opposed to this again. Not a big difference, but it's a difference to me. It's a matter of dialect, and you'll hear me use that word a lot, and I know most people don't understand what I mean. But dialect in articulation is something where we're paying attention to those little details. If I play it the wrong way, and it really is to me the wrong way, I don't think you'll have anyone disagree with me on me with that. If you do, feel free to tell me and provide me the reason why you would drop lift on those slurs. But to play it the other way accents the wrong beat in classical music. It's something we would do only in jazz or pop or contemporary styles. So that's what I would watch out for in écossais. Going on to bourrée, now we're back into the real baroque period here. This is an exciting bourrée, again in 2/2 time. We want it to feel quick enough that it feels like 2 beats per bar. So you'll hear me move through this fairly quickly, but I'm trying to, again, exaggerate these articulation markings, ya dum, da 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 da. So we know, we have a feeling that we know where the downbeat is, and the second beat of the measure, the second large half note, is not as accented. We'll talk a little bits about articulation in Baroque music like we did in grade 1. If anyone's not sure about Baroque articulation and how to re-edit these things, take a look at the September 13th webinar where I look at Mosaics grade 1, group 1. I talk in quite a bit of detail about how the keyboard player's ear is informed in a way that tells us which notes belong together and which ones are more detached. But I'll touch on those things a little bit here as well. For now though, just listen to this gesture again like I did in the last piece. Even though it's 100 years earlier or so, there's still this idea that I'm tapering the music so that I know where the downbeat is, going from a weak beat to strong beat so that there's an audible gesture that we can hear. And again, most of this is going to be detached in the left hand to emulate the continual players, the cello player, harpsichord's left hand. That one I find myself doing a gradual crescendo to the end, and you can sort of see in the dynamics if a student takes the repeats. And again, for Conservatory Canada, repeats are only allowed in group 1 pieces, Baroque pieces specifically. For grades 1 to 6, if a student wants to do the repeat, it's expected they'll do something different the second time, as in ornament. I'm not going to get too complicated into that for now for grades 1 and 2. Maybe grade 3 we'll start talking about ornamentation a little bit, but not necessary, and we don't really expect students to do these repeats in these early levels, but you do have that license there if you're coaching in that manner. Lots of freedom and flexibility. So there you can see towards the end I'm trying to crescendo a little bit and get just a bit more of a louder sound there, and mostly detached throughout. So that's bourrée. We get a lot of German dances in this volume, which is kind of neat. Haydn and Beethoven specifically, and I'll play through all of them, of course. This German dance is kind of neat because what I'm listening for here, or trying to highlight, is the 4-bar phrase. And we get a G chord, or the 1 chord, going to the 4 chord, we get some kind of sustained chord there, and then back to the 1 chord in bar 4, then a 1, 4, 5, 7, 1. I'm trying to highlight that 4-bar phrase with my dynamics so that the second bar is a bit louder than the first bar, grows to the 3rd bar, relaxes in the 4th bar. Bar 5, 6 builds to bar 7 where we get the dominant. The dominant is a large clue for that's the highlight of the phrase, relaxing at bar 8. So listen for those shapes there that I'm trying to put very subtle dynamics. It's not that I would make dynamic markings different there, but I'm always tapering and trying to figure out which is more interesting and bring the listener to the 4-bar phrase somehow and give it length. Same thing in the second half. You can hear me trying to shape there, bring out the dynamics a little bit. It doesn't have to be exactly as on the page. It can be a little bit different. Back then they didn't notate these dynamics, especially Haydn, all that rigorously. We do have vertex editions that will get pretty close, but different versions depending on whether it's the composer's manuscript, the first copied edition, the edition in Germany, the edition in France, the edition in Italy. They're all slightly different often, and these things were more improvised, these dynamics. And so that's what was happening in the time. By the time we get to Beethoven, it's a little more set in stone. By the time we get to Chopin, very much so. And so it's just good to know that you can re-edit these things a little bit, and you'll hear me from time to time not exactly following the score the way we've printed. Sometimes as I play through this book many times over the last few weeks, my feelings toward the music's evolving, and we encourage students and teachers to do the same. And let it evolve, let it change a little bit, and I find I'm refining my vision for how it's going to go over time each time I do it. So it's a spirit of inquiry that we adopt into this. And again, there I'm trying to highlight the phrasing. Hopefully you can hear that. It's very subtle, but I think my microphone will pick that up. Again, if anyone has any questions here in the Zoom room, please let me know. I'm going to try and watch the chat box, but I don't see anything yet. Okay, May Dance by Cornelius Gurlitt. We tried to include a few Gurlitt pieces here and there in the early grades. Just a great classical composer. Everything's in these beautiful 4-bar phrases, and the structure is really, really clear. Not really Mozartian necessarily, but the structure is very much like that, very, very classical. So it's quite simple. And when I hear this one, I'm thinking more of a gavotte than anything, where you've got beats 3 and 4, these two up beats that are short, landing on beat 1, and then in that first full bar, there's like a turn almost between beats 3 and 4. And so you'll hear that little up, up, down to begin each 4-bar phrase, very reminiscent of a gavotte. So that's what I'm trying to highlight here. So again, just trying to highlight that gesture, and when I get to the downbeat, I'm really flexing into that with my arms. I don't know if you can see here, but I'm trying to exaggerate that. Up is short, and then the down, I'm trying to use all of my upper torso and definitely my long levers of my arms to break into that so that it sounds like I'm bending my knees. Trying to emulate and really bring out the dance steps, I think, is really important in this one. A Minuet by Johann Kuhnau. So this is back to Baroque here. You can see in this one we purposely put no slurs. There's any number of things you can do here. And maybe what I'll do is I'll play the repeats on this one, and I'll play it totally differently the second time. The first time I'm going to focus more on let's say, detached. And then the second time I'm going to go through and add a bunch of slurs just to see the difference. And I'll do the same thing in the second half, and then we'll talk about which one I like better and why. So what I find there is when I'm playing it mostly detached, I don't get the same feeling of knee bends. I get a lot of toe pointing in the dance, but there's no knee bends, there's no turns or anything. When I start joining certain notes together, and often in a minuet it'll be beats 1 and 2 joined, lifting off beats 2 and 3. When you get that, there's an opportunity to create more of a gesture so that you hear differences. It's a little bit of a different texture where we get combinations of things joined together and things detached from each other. And it's that combination that I find really interesting in Baroque. If it's all detached all the way through, it's okay, but we miss out on the opportunity to create more structure and more texture in through the articulation. So hopefully you can hear that. Listen to the 2 repeats and how I'm trying to do that a little bit differently. Any number of ways this can go. If we do it all legato, I won't demonstrate that now, but try it. And that too sounds more lyrical, but because there's a lot of leaps in here, some larger intervals, I think we're missing out on an opportunity to create some leaps or different gestures through the dance. Ländler, Beethoven. It's nice to have more Beethoven in these early books here for students to hear. One of his simple dances here, very similar to some of the other German dances. This one's very rewarding to play though, because it's just these running eights over 2 octaves. Students have to really have their fingering in check. I find the articulation on the way down through these broken arpeggios here kind of interesting. I'm not going to lift too quickly on those. I'm lifting, but it's as if on a forte piano. I've heard it's very easy to do lifts on the forte piano without making a big gesture. And so I'm trying to imitate that here a little bit, and I'll try and take us on a nice ride here through this Austrian waltz. Bit of a risky tempo, but I find you get a nice smooth 3/4 and you really hear the long lines of these long crescendos become easier at that tempo. For a grade 2 student, that might be a bit difficult, something more cautious, I'm sure, for a while. I've lived with this piece for a long time. It used to be in our old Western Ontario Conservatory music books back in the late 80s into the 90s, and so I know it quite well. The reason I did the repeat, I made a small mistake at the beginning, so I went back to try and correct that, and so I locked myself into doing the repeats. If a student does that in grade 2 on a 1-page piece like this in the classical period, it's not a big deal. The examiner needs more time to write anyway, and probably, it's not necessary to do the repeat, but if the student gets into it and realizes they could do a repeat and do something better just to show the examiner, it's a good tactic, I think. We certainly don't mind that kind of thing. If we get into a 2-page sonatina and repeats start being taken, that's a different story. Then we're starting to take a little bit too much time, perhaps. But just keep that in mind. So again, on those 2-note slurs on the way down, let's say bar 13, 14, 15 at the bottom system. I'm not trying to lift too much, just a little bit. And I'm fudging with a little bit of pedal in the background too, because I always am. Not that we can really hear that. I wouldn't probably have students at this level worrying about the pedal at all. It's too easy to obscure those 8th notes. So German dance again by Beethoven. This one's a little bit simpler in some ways. And here I'm just trying to highlight the structure, these 4-bar phrases, sometimes a little bit of flexibility at the end of each of those 4-bar units in terms of time. Very simple. I think the dynamics are quite obvious there in terms of what we printed, which one's louder, which one's quieter, loud toward the finish. You can hear me in some places. I'm playing those 2-note slurs. Let's say in measure 3 at the top of the top right corner in the first system there. I'm not joining all of those 5 notes or 6 notes all together. I'm breaking that up so that beat 1 is on its own. Things like that. You can reinterpret sometimes when it comes to these slurs, I think, especially in the dances. If you hear the dance a slightly different way, that's totally allowable. And then, interesting here, Kernberger, this horseback ride. It feels like more of a baroque piece to me because the left hand is so active and there's a lot of detached things. A moderate canter is the tempo indication there, around 88 beats per minute. I'll probably go a little bit faster than that just to provide more 6/8 feel, get that fun left hand driving in the bass line to answer the right hand. The important thing here, I think, is dialogue between the 2 hands. And so I'm going to try and make sure my left hand's driving, and always driving the 6 notes to the downbeat so that I've got some kind of inflection. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. And in my right hand with these broken chords, I'm going to do some fancy articulations there reminiscent of a minuet, where I'll have the first 2 triplets joined and 2 and 3 detached a little bit. And we'll see how that sounds for this one. couple slight ritordandos, and you'll hear me do that in other places where it isn't marked, but sometimes to show off the structure it's essential, I think. To show off that this is section A, this is section B, or as part of section B there's a phrase, and there's a little pause or a little breath before we give the result at the end. Those things are totally allowable in these, so follow my rule there, or my model if you want to convince somebody of that. I think it's totally exciting to do it that way. And at the very end, you hear I did a crescendo rather than diminuendo. You could relax this one at the finish, but in this style, flamboyant, more extroverted is certainly allowable as well. Okay, Sonatina. This is a first movement by Thomas Atwood. It's a little bit on the slower side, allegretto, lightly. I'm not going to get too carried away with this 6/8 here. I'm going to hold back a little bit, even though it's a first movement. There's just something lyrical about this, and so I want to make sure I have enough time to express the line. If I go too quickly, I'm not going to get the crescendo, diminuendo inflection under the phrases that I otherwise would be missing. Smooth and legato all the way through pretty much. As I got into the first phrase, I'm looking at these slurs going over 2 bars, and as I got into it I realized no, that's a 4-bar phrase. And so I altered in the second line, trying to get a 4-bar idea where I'm crescendoing right through bar 5, 6, all the way to 7, the downbeat of 7 before relaxing, to show off that structure. Sometimes in classical music the slurs are there for other reasons, but the pianist, we interpret them as longer slurs in terms of where does our direction of the phrase go. Okay, so that's an interesting thought there, to watch the phrasing carefully, I think. Back to the Baroque period on the next page here. This is by Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, a minuet. Tricky to play, lots of different angles, but we like this one because we don't get to see it too often. Lots of detached playing in the left hand. The 8th notes I will try and join, and again I'm thinking of a continual group, a Baroque cello with the harpsichord's left hand, mostly things detached, and that allows us to hear the soloist in the right hand, which in this piece you never know, could be a violin or a viola or a flute or a recorder. And some of the repeated notes, of course, are going to be detached, and you'll see me breaking up some of the slurs, although I like the look of the slurs in this one. Faster notes that are stepwise are joined more legato. Leaps are detached from each other a little bit as string players would cross the strings. And again, we talk about in Baroque articulation, trying to be informed by what a string player would do. There are offset strings and having to cross the bow, the convex bow, how that convex bow lifts nice and easily, how the direction of the bow changes often. And so we're imitating those kind of things when we're at the piano. And for a full rundown on that, check out that webinar from September 13th where I go over that when I do grade 1, group 1 music, if you're curious to hear more about what I'm talking about there. For now, I'm just going to emulate that style and see if we can hear the dance steps here. We mark an andante con moto at the beginning. I'm going to try and hold back a little bit from my usual minuet tempo to reflect that. See how it works. But I held back a little bit there. Sometimes I may play that a little bit faster, but I like that approach, nice and cautious. Gives me time to show off the phrasing and get all the intricate details right. And then, Ignatius Sancho, Our good friend George Litterst at Time Warp Technologies did a really good webinar on Ignatius Sancho last year, and so I'd encourage you to check that out. But this is from his catalog here, the Time Warp Technologies catalog, where all of these Mosaics books are also loaded into the SuperScore app, and in some cases you'll be able to download them there first before the hard copies are available. And so this comes from that catalog. Really lively 6/8 dance here, lots of fine articulation. I like the way this has been edited, and I'm going to try and emulate that as close as I can. And I'll probably end up going a little quicker than Moderato on this, just to see what kind of excitement. So it's an exploratory. I get inquisitive about it. I haven't lived with these pieces all that long yet, and so I'm still learning from them each time. But each time I try to go with them with slightly fresh eyes, a little bit experimental, and just see how much fun I can have. And if I have too much fun, then I can back away later. Mostly forte all the way through, but you can hear I'm trying to always taper things a little bit, always have some kind of inflection. I felt like I started more forte in the second half. I still found a higher gear there in the volume in the last line, starting at measure 13, but I like that crescendo there. It's kind of exciting. And a little pause at the end of bar 14 is totally allowable in this kind of style as well before we deliver the conclusion. So that's a real fun one. I look forward to selling that to my students. And I do try to sell these for my students. You know, when I play, I still have a small studio I teach here, and I'm in my teaching studio now with you. And I play the music for them to try and get them excited about it with as much detail as possible. And then, let them swim in it later, and we uncover the detail for their hands later on over a period of weeks. But it's a fun kind of process when you can play that way. You can sell the music to the students, and this is a good one. I think that's probably an easy sell to get them into. Lots of pieces in 6/8 time in this volume. Another German dance here by Beethoven, slightly different title, Deutscher Tanz, but it's the same thing. It's kind of neat. We've got the pedal indications there. Sometimes I take those, sometimes I don't. Maybe I'll do that two ways here. I'll do this the first time without pedal. I'm going to do it the first time with pedal, second time without so much pedal and keeping my left hand attached, just to see what differences I can draw out of the music. That first repeat. I meant to repeat each section, but sometimes it just doesn't work out. So detached left hand versus pedal. Right now I kind of like the pedal a little bit, but I'm trying to find a way to pedal in there so that I can still hear those dance steps in the left hand. Tricky little piece, but I think students will really like that. The accents, F-set, forzando, we don't take those too seriously. We don't want students to bang on them too hard. It's just a focal point in the line. Make that feel like a stronger downbeat. And that also helps to break up where the phrase is. These are shorter 2-bar phrases when we see 2 F-sets in the first line there. If it was a longer 4-bar phrase, we'd probably only see one of them. All these little clues we try to put together visually to understand the phrasing structure that the composer gives us. Okay, tricky minuet here in D minor by Handel. This one also comes from George Litter's library over at Time Warp. Lots of dots there. I'm probably going to ignore some of the dots. I'm going to try and favor the more slurred with dots articulation, again to add a little bit more texture and a little bit more variety to get a little bit more gesture of the dance steps in the sound. need for comparison, I'll go through once here, all detached like his mark there, just so we can hear the difference. We'll see if we like it. I don't mind it. I think it's nice. Lots of toe pointing. Again, that's just my own personal preference, and I would probably want to break that up so I didn't have 7 staccatos in a row. That's all. But again, for an exam, if you're coaching a student, certainly allowable to do it that way, as long as they're thinking about the articulation. Either way, it still sounds Baroque. And if you listen to really good Baroque ensembles, playing on period instruments, these are the sort of decisions they may consider and talk about all the time. How are we going to do this? What is the effect? That kind of thing. And we want to emulate that on the piano as well. On to Leopold Mozart. This is a Polonaise, a little bit tricky. This one we tend to see in some of the books. We'll acknowledge that it's not a rare piece by any means, but quite interesting. It's in B flat, so you've got 2 black keys to deal with, and there are many times here where I find myself with my thumbs on the black keys. That's totally allowable, and I think that's something that we just have to live with in this one. So a good challenge for a grade 2 student. Finding I'm leaning on my right hand a lot in this piece to bring out more juice of the sound, hiding the left hand a little bit more, just getting into allows that right hand to be heard, because the left hand's quite busy in this one. What else did I notice there? There's something I thought about halfway through. It's the thumbs on the black keys. Oh, the dynamics. I remember now. Going through, I believe it is starting at measure 8. It's marked forte, and I'm playing it quiet all the way through. That's okay. Maybe I should have started loud and try it quiet. Those are some things I would experiment with the more often I play this one. I'm trying to get more of that dynamic variety out there. Okay, this is great here. Back to Purcell, and this is a prelude. And again, I'll play it twice. You'll see not many slurs here, but I think there are just certain pieces that we get for the keyboard in Baroque, especially with Purcell, Handel, where they're more emulating an organ type of sound. Okay, and so what I do here is I like to use the pedal actually in this one. I don't fully bathe in the pedal, but there are long moments here where it's helping me resonate because there's not so much of a melody, it's these chordal units that are moving next to each other. And when you get these chordal units, even though it's broken, it's nice to be able to connect them with at least the hands, if not some resonance of the pedal as well. So let's do this 2 ways. I'm going to go first plucking my way along, let's say, like some of the other Baroque pieces, and then the second time through, I'll add the layer of pedal and make it more organ-like, and we'll see what we think. I'm growing quite fond of the second way myself, the more often I play this one. The first one just doesn't have the resonance and texture I think that the music sort of demands, and it's harder to pull off the connection between one chord and the next and hearing that progression. And so you'll hear me do neat things. I don't have the pedal all the way to the floor. It's kind of on and off, and difficult to sort of translate with a student, especially doing an online lesson, trying to talk about this kind of fine pedaling I find quite difficult. But it's something we try to listen for. Maybe even at this level, I would have them include that pedal there. There's something neat happens to me in bar 8. If you look at this design, sometimes we talk about, especially in box music, the idea of counterpoint within one hand. And so here, if I look at the strong beats, and I look at the off beats, they're interesting, but not as interesting as the notes he's put on the strong beats. So what I'm trying to do there is highlight the stronger beats and make the top note, the end of every eighth note set, a little bit lighter. Just to bring out the design and bring up the counterpoint within the hand. That's a little bit advanced, but I'm trying to give you all little advanced things to think about. Things maybe you haven't heard before, things you haven't tried with students at this level. Sometimes we have those students ready to go and they feel like they're ready for an exam. If you can throw a couple of these little kernels at them and they're able to adapt that to their hand and their listening, you'll see their marks go up on their assessments in their exam or in the music festival. An examiner or an adjudicator hears right away that there's another level of detail that the student is listening in, and it helps them to stand out right away. It gives them something intellectual to focus on. I think is really important in bringing out the music. A saraband by Corelli. Saraband's typically the slowest dance we have. You can see this is marked Adagio. I think so far tried to dive into this a little too quickly, so I'm going to try and really take my time today. Beat 2 we know gets a little stress in a saraband, and you see some of the beat 2s there are marked with a tenuto line, and so I'm going to try and stress those a little bit, bring out some phrasing, not obsess so much about the detached nature, but more the legato nature. And I should have mentioned with the prelude previously, the other thing we want to do sometimes is just simply take advantage of the resonance that the piano has. It can be a really expressive tool. Baroque music is a very expressive, flamboyant, extravagant kind of aesthetic, and we want to use the piano to its full advantage sometimes while still honoring the intention of how the articulation should work. This one I'm sure we can get away with a little bit more legato, so I'm going to see how that works in this slow dance. Not a lot of dynamic variety. I find myself hesitating on making bold dynamic contrasts here. It's quite monothematic, it's only a short piece. So feel free to squish those dynamics a little bit. Going back, I would just probably try and find a place to play softer, just to have that little bit of variety somewhere, or an introverted character. Another minuet here, this one by Alessandro Scarlatti. Not a composer we hear a lot of, but we see the odd piece in some of these conservatory books. This one seems similar to the saraband to me, but the minuet's going to be a little bit quicker. Allegro moderato could certainly be more moderato, but I think 120 beats per minute is quite good. And again, I'm just going to try and show off some of the minuet articulation in this one. And I'll see what I can pull out for dynamics with some little echoes there that I see marked in the dynamic scheme. I'm often hesitant to do diminuendos at the end of Baroque dances. There would probably be a good case to do that here instead. I kind of got turned around on my dynamics later on toward the end, but I like what happened early on where I was able to get some echo effects there in that second line. So that's a little bit about minuet. You can hear how we're trying to articulate and lift rather cleanly and carefully. And this is fun here. Back to classical period, William Duncombe. We see some of his easier pieces in the early grades in the conservatory books from time to time. And here's a fanfare that Paul Scheftel, one of George Litter's friends, has found. Lots of articulation, hammering away on, he's not hammering away, but it's going to feel like hammering away, almost like a woodpecker approach to these staccato eighth notes that are repeated notes. And so the thing is going to be, do we want to change fingers on all of those, or do we want to use the same finger to get a more rapid fire? I usually teach my students, honestly, not to change fingers. I find it quite cumbersome for them. Maybe when they get a bit older, they can do that on repeated notes. For myself, too, I'd rather use a loose wrist and a loose arm. I'd rather have them, and this is not set in stone. I mean, it's nice to be able to change fingers on repeated notes. There's times for that. But for me, young hands and young arms, I'm trying to get them to be flexible and be able to shape repeated notes with the same finger and focus more on this mechanism. So you'll see me using that kind of approach here. And you can see we haven't advocated for that kind of fingering with changing fingers in this particular piece, although you could certainly do that and still make it sound, I think, very good. Both approaches are good. So here's the fanfare by Duncombe. On the double thirds, you can't really change fingers either, so either way, this one's a good one to learn how to launch several, in this case 5 in a row with one gesture. Sonatina in C. Now I believe this is our last one today. I think this finishes the whole first half. This is a 2-page piece. It's a first movement, allegro montanto, allegro but not too much generally. And I tend to be wanting to play this one quite slow, I find. And so I'm looking at the structure, and I think it's a really good one to get students ready for that sonatina structure that comes a lot more in grade 3. And give them the idea that the essence of the sonatina is something, I'll say this more simply, something with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we happen to have these really interesting words called exposition, development, recapitulation. And later on we'll learn in some of the longer sonatinas and sonatas that the exposition has 2 themes that are joined by a bridge, and it's usually repeated and all this kind of stuff. But for now, what I would do is I usually write on students a piece like this. I'll write right on the score. Exposition, at bar 9, here's the development. Later on, 8 bars later, here's the recapitulation. And just to get those names out there in the students' consciousness so that when we get to the grade 3 sonatinas, they've got an idea of those formal divisions. And over the next few years in grade levels, we can determine what that really means and how we can highlight that structure for the listener. Because to me, that's the essence of the sonatina or a sonata. So I'll play through this. I'm going to go a little bit on the slower, safer side, I find, because it is more lyrical. There's lots of articulation here. And I'm just trying to show off the 4-bar phrases all the way through, or the 2 + 2 = 4. We'll see what we have here. So actually a lot in this one. If we look at the second page here, you can see where I'm thinking the recap begins. It's a direct repeat of the beginning at bar 21. And leading up to that, through this, what we might call the development. And these are primitive sections. You know, a lot of people just call this an ABA. That's fine too at this level. But to me, what really stood out was starting at bar 15. We get this repetitive G in the left hand. We don't have to share this with students yet, but it's something to keep in mind. It's something I learned about in university and I thought was a really neat thing I'd never heard before from a conductor, in fact, was the idea of the dominant pedal section ending the development, signifying the recap. And so in the left hand at 15, you get this repetitive G, with chords changing in the right hand, and that repetitive dominant sound, trying to return us to the home key at the end. It's a really neat thing to listen for, to get students to be attuned to. And you can just point it out to them here without calling it anything. We call it the dominant pedal, and it signifies the return to the recap because it's giving us the dominant chord, which is the way that we get back to C major. Not too big of a modulation in this one, although we do go to G major as well quite quickly, and that's kind of a neat feature in this one. So that's what I'm thinking about here. Again, this one could easily go a lot faster. I'll just demo a little bit here. I'll play on the second page. I'll go actually top the second page with that piece of the score open so that you can watch. Character, I think. Sorry, I did turn the microphone down on that, but I think that'll be okay for you all. More of an allegro character, but tricky at this grade level because it's mostly quarter notes, not so many eighth notes. I think it's okay to hold this back a little bit from a typical allegro with your students. But again, the forming the structure and expressing the phrasing with this kind of inflection that you're hearing, I think that's the most important thing. And this is a really good example to get us ready for the grade 3 sonatinas. Beyond that, the next piece, Soldier's March, again, Schumann, that belongs in group 2, and you'll see that in your copies when you get them. And that's where we'll start next week. We'll take a look at Schumann and go beyond into the group 2 music, which you can see here. Everything from Lynette Sawatsky, Lee Evans, Karen Roll, Beth Hamilton, Andrew Harbour, George Snyder, and so on. Bella Bartok there, and all sorts of other composers that I think you'll really enjoy. And when we talk about the group 2 music, we talk more about the contemporary styles and certain things to listen for that are much different than perhaps the classical dialect that we've been listening to today, classical and baroque. So those of you here with me live, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat box there. I'm quite happy to answer them. I'm going to stop the recording in just a moment, and as we customarily do, and we can talk a little bit more in detail about some questions you may have without the recording or without the YouTube audience. Coming up then next Friday, I've decided we'll go on with that Group 2, Grade 2 repertoire. I'll hit your inboxes next week with a Zoom link if you want to join live. Thanks to the few of you that are watching on the YouTube channel now. Really appreciate that. It's nice to see you there as well. Of course, when you're on the YouTube channel watching, you can't necessarily ask questions there, but you're welcome to do either or, whatever makes sense. And of course, to many of you watching the replay later, we thank you too for the views that we're getting on the channel as the weeks go on. Lots of webinars there and content to look at. Upcoming, like I said, next week we're going to do Grade 2, Group 2. And then we're going to take a week off as the Thanksgiving weekend hits. And then beyond that, I'm hoping to have the Grade 3 book by then. Or we may go back and check out the prep book, because we have a prep book full of interesting music. I don't know, 24 pieces or so that I'd like to highlight for you at some point. And then at the end of October, we actually have someone booked, Dr. Aaron Parks, who's in Ottawa, who runs what's called the Lotus Center, is going to start a series of webinars for us on teaching students with exceptionalities, neurodiverse students, and the like. We've done a few sessions on this in the past, but I think she's the person I want to come in and take us in a little bit more detail through those topics, because I know we're seeing a lot more of those students in our studios, and we just have such a golden opportunity to help them through the music that they love. So we look forward to that at the end of October. A couple of other people too coming on here before Christmas. But again, the main thrust of these webinars for now is going to be our Mosaic series, where hopefully you're ordering them. We hope to have Grade 3 ready in the next week or two here for sale. We thought that might be ready by now, but we've run into a couple little kinks, and we just want to make sure everything's really accurate, crossing our T's and dotting our I's when it comes to the permission agreements that we're paying composers for the rights to use their music in the series. And I see we've got one question here, or one chat. Okay, so someone's just ordered 3 books from the Calgary Long McQuaid. They only had one of each on order. Well, thanks for stimulating that. That'll get them in order, I think. And I know Calgary, we have a huge center there, and it's building every year. And so I'm sure they'll be getting more than just one on order. So good luck getting those books. Again, if you want them right away, people go straight to andrewharbridge.com or Wanless Music. If you go to Wanless Music, you can also order all sorts of other things like the keyboard harmony books that we advocate for, the Total Theory, all sorts of really great music that they have there as well. So I'm going to stop the recording there. We're coming up near the top of the hour. Thanks for your attention. Hopefully you like the music. Give us some feedback. Send me an email if you can, or Andrew Harbridge. Let us know what you think of the music that you're seeing in the Mosaic series, if you like it or not. If you like the format of these webinars where I'm trying to illuminate special things in the music that maybe we haven't thought of. And I hope to do more of them. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll check in next Friday. Those of you here in the Zoom room, I'll give you the chance to chat with me a little bit further if you like.